Well, as you can see from the sermon title, I might still be a little bit bitter about the Falcons. So, just want to throw that out there. But we find ourselves with the lectionary at the end of the Sermon on the Mount, and the end of the lectionary section of the Sermon on the Mount. The Sermon on the Mount actually goes on through chapter 7. We're only in chapter 5, so you're welcome. But today, if you're following along, you'll find the scripture in the Gospel according to Matthew chapter 5, verses 38 through 48. And if you're looking in a Pew Bible, you can find it on page 602 in the New Testament. And I got to stop doing that white mountain bread in the black robe because it's like all over me now, the flour. You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist an evildoer. But if anyone strikes you on the right cheek, turn the other also. And if anyone wants to sue you and take your coat, give them your cloak as well. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go that 2nd mile. Give to everyone who begs from you, and do not refuse anyone who wants to borrow from you. You have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be children of your Father in heaven. For God makes the sun rise on the evil and on the good, and God sends rain on the righteousness and the unrighteous. For if you love those who love you, what reward do you get? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? And if you greet only your brothers and sisters, what more do you do than anybody else? Don't even the Gentiles do the same? Be perfect. Therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect. Sorry, the be perfect part, it made me laugh. Cause oh, okay. So, still in the Sermon on the Mount. And now we are neck deep in Jesus' words about how to interpret the law, but we find ourselves kind of taking a different path with this section. We have one of those more quotable passages from Jesus here, and I'm sure that we have heard it multiple times spoken to us from the mouths of our Sunday school teachers, of our parents, of our friends, all sorts of people. And it seems a pretty meek, and if I can be honest, it seems a pretty boring text that we as modern hearers just might be inclined to sort of be like, brush that aside. Yeah, I get it. Don't return evil for evil. That's pretty simple. I can live with that up until a point. That's how that conversation always goes. Unless somebody makes a yo mama joke, and then it's on. It's often read and interpreted as a kill them with kindness mentality. That eventually, you know what, we're going to wear them down because we're just such doggone good people. I mean, it sounds terrible when you hear that said out loud. I mean, it sounds really pompous. What if I told you that this is not what this text is about? What if I told you that these suggestions, when applied to the culture and context of Jesus and his disciples, are actually subversive responses to oppression and injustice? What if I told you that they were creative, nonviolent ways to respond to particular situations that a first century Jew would often find themselves in? This is where I hold up my hands and I ask you, do you want to take the red pill or do you want to take the blue pill? And that's not just a creepy phrase. It's, the Matrix. Sorry. Well, let's take a look at these and let's see if shedding some context on these might help. So rules, they make sense. You got to have rules. Everybody gets that. Jesus still using the language of, you heard it said, but I tell you. And he recognizes the importance of these rules by quoting a pretty basic one. An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. And hopefully in your mind, maybe Gandhi's words of an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth makes the whole world blind and toothless come to your mind. But this makes sense in a tribal society that would engage in feudal wars over land, resources, loss of life, and honor. So let's look at it like this, all right? My dog Kona. cute dog. He's a beast. He's like a ninja. He runs over and he runs into Greg and Melissa's yard and he eats a chicken. He eats one of your chickens, right? That's going to cause a problem. It's not like Greg can run on over to Publix back in antiquity and grab another chicken. He's got to raise it. He is down a chicken, and it could mean the loss of a meal for him and his family. And in order to prevent some sort of escalation, there's a simple rule. I got to give Greg a chicken or something comparable. Problem solved, you know? If Greg's a nice guy, he might even invite me over to watch the Super Bowl and eat some hot wings, all 2 of them. If things get out of hand, where property, life, or limb is destroyed, the purpose of this law is to make it as fair as possible. Now, not necessarily just, but to make it fair. 2 different things there. So there wouldn't be a tit for tat, an escalation, where it makes things worse. With the Hatfield McCoys, you know, maybe that comes to your mind, the Appalachian feud between the 2 families, how it keeps on getting bigger and bigger and bigger, right? But I say to you, important, because Jesus is reinterpreting the law for the modern hearer. And when I say modern hearer, I mean first century Jew. If anyone strikes you on the right cheek, turn the other also. All right, that seems pretty straightforward enough, but without the cultural context, it has often been interpreted as an abusive theology where you just wear them down because all of a sudden maybe they'll feel bad for hitting you and you're not saying anything about it. Actually, that text is, this is kind of an aside, but that text has been used as potentially very hurtful theology as well, that, you should just take it. Theologian, professor, and prophet Walter Wink, one of my heroes, succinctly explains the complexity of these 3 particular common interactions that a first century Jew might encounter. With the absence of the middle class in an agrarian society, the majority of folks are going to be dirt poor, working on somebody else's land as a farmer, maybe as a fisherman, maybe as a herdsman. If you lived in the city, you might provide some manual labor for some construction projects. And striking somebody wasn't exactly an uncommon way to show displeasure, especially if you were a superior striking a peasant. You got 2 hands. One hand could be used to strike somebody, and that's the right hand. The other hand simply could not, how do I put this? It was used for unseemly things. It would not touch another human because it was considered unclean. I'm talking about going to the bathroom. So this hand is just pretend it's not there. So you reserve your right hand to strike somebody with, and if they're beneath you, you're supposed to backhand them. Now I'm going to do something real quick that I've never done before. I need a volunteer. I'm not going to strike you, I promise, but I do need a volunteer in all seriousness. All right, Alec, come on up here. Alec. All right, so this is how it goes. You reserve your right hand to strike somebody with, and they're beneath you. You're supposed to backhand, right? It's kind of hard for you guys to see, but you understand backhand, right? All right, it's a public way of asserting dominance, of asserting honor, and asserting authority. So you get slapped, and Jesus tells you, well, turn the other cheek. Well, this makes things awkward. So I hit you on this cheek, so turn the other cheek. Now, this is weird, right? So it's going to be difficult for me. I can't use my left hand, remember, potty hand. So I still have to use my right hand. If I backhand him, it's going to kind of brush off, or I'm going to hit him in the nose, and it's going to cause his nose to bleed, which makes both him and I unclean. This is very important. So I can't really do that. So what I'm going to do is maybe I'll try and walk around like this, but he starts walking around like this, and now I just look really silly, right? So we just walk around in a circle. So I can't do that, okay? Now I just look dumb. So my only option is to strike him like this with an open hand. Thank you, Alec. Appreciate that. Alec. So my only option is to strike him with an open hand. I guess I can have this hand out now, This might not seem like a big deal to us, but that's because of that C word, context. If I strike you with an open hand, that is what somebody does when striking an equal. But you're just a peasant that works for me. It may or may not keep the attacker from striking again, but it will definitely make them look foolish, make them unclean, or it will make them strike you with an open hand, declaring you an equal. And so ultimately, you are saying, I have dignity and I have power. All right, so that's the first one. Stay with me, we got two more. Then there's the, if anyone sues you for your coat, give them your cloak as well. Well, if you were poor, and again, most people were, you had two pieces of clothing. You had your coat and you had your cloak. Your coat would protect you against the elements. You would wrap up inside it as a sheet, and it would be your bedding too. It was also law that if you were being sued, they could take your coat as payment if you had nothing else. But not your cloak, right? Now your cloak is what you wore under your coat. There was nothing under that. Jesus instructs that if a person is suing you, if they are so bent on taking everything that you have, taking advantage of the poor, that they are willing to take somebody's bedding and warmth away to pay their debt, remember, agrarian society, then you should give them your cloak as well. Yep, you guessed it. That means you're naked. So you are saying, well, you've already taken everything else away from me. Why don't you go ahead and take this too? It shames the practice of taking what little the poor have, and then being naked shames whoever sees it. So it's an honor-shame society. We can talk about that maybe more at another time because it's a lot of stuff. But you have to understand, bad to be shamed. Number 3, remember, these are all common things that happen all the time to a first century Palestinian peasant. As occupiers, Rome regularly had troops going in and out of Jewish land. We see this particularly during Jewish festivals and feasts because you know why? That's when folks get rowdy. When you celebrate running away from an empire, it makes sense. So Roman soldiers, they could conscript peasants to carry their gear for them, force them to carry their gear for 1 mile and 1 mile only. Rome had to play this game of how much can we take from you without you getting too upset. And so they had these regulations to try and keep these soldiers in line so that you would be reprimanded if you tried to get somebody to take your gear more than 1 mile. So when Jesus instructs you to carry that pack that extra mile, it's not saying, hey, kill him with kindness, just be that nice guy. It's to make them think twice about asking you to carry the pack in the first place. Either they have to wrestle that pack right off your back, or they are reprimanded publicly. Wink calls this Jesus' third way. And it's called the third way because it creates a new option. The traditional options having been violent resistance or meek acquiescence. Fight back or just take it. Wink suggests Jesus is giving another option, a third way that doesn't let the oppressor get away scot-free but doesn't have to resort to violence. It's about preserving the dignity of the poor and the oppressed while bringing to attention the unjust situation. And this is where Dr. King and Gandhi get their nonviolent practices from. We might think to ourselves, well, that's nice of Jesus, but those aren't really practical things for us to do. They don't really apply to us. The thing is, Jesus is reinterpreting the law to make it practical. Real life situations for the common peasant. Options that retain dignity and that don't resort to violence. The task for us is to continue to interpret based on new situations. We come to the final part of the text, and the section is pretty straightforward. Love your enemies. If you only love the people who love you, how different are you from the tax collectors? We think about maybe people that we might consider evil in our history. They had family, they had friends, they had loved ones. They loved them. I'm sure they were loved back. And I don't mean to put everybody on the same level, but I think that Jesus' example of the Pharisees, helps to illustrate that loving our enemies is hard. We had to go to Jamaica one time when I was in seminary, and we only went to the beach for a day and a half, I promise. So rest assured, most of our time of our month was spent in the downtown Kingston area, and the street where we stayed was dubbed by the locals the Gaza Strip. We did make our way to a church in the high mountains one day that was gorgeous. We wove our way up precarious, windy, pothole-laden dirt road at a snail's pace. We made our way over streams and through the clouds, and as we reached the peak of this mountain, you could see nearly from one end of the island to the other. It was beautiful. We were visiting a church in the mountains, and the local pastor was going to share some of his experience about what pastoring his community was like. We walked into the humble stucco Sunday school building because the traditional church building had had the roof ripped off it from a hurricane a couple months ago. And I got to be honest, I don't really remember a whole lot of what he said, except for one thing that has seared in my mind. He got to talking about the Sermon on the Mount, and he said, you know what? Jesus never said tolerate your enemies. Jesus said to love your enemies. There's a difference. Living in the world is hard. And it's easy to go about our day-to-day business ignoring the reality of many who are hurting around us. There might be issues of injustice that we witness, moments where our sisters and brothers are being robbed of dignity. It also might be something like a coworker or a friend who lashes out at us with stinging words. And as we have talked about before, hurt people hurt people. It's easy to forget that we are all made in the beloved image of our Creator. Relationships are hard and beautiful. God leads us to relationships with honor and dignity in life of all people, those we love and those we find it difficult to love. Here, Jesus shows us a third way, that it's not an easy one, but that it's rewarding. We find that we are better together, and God shows us creative ways to affirm and love one another. Let us continue to do the work that is both hard and beautiful. Amen.